Welcome back to Curious Now from the Center for Medical Simulation. I'm Jenny Rudolph, an organizational behavior scholar who's interested in all the things that we think and feel that make us perform well in our relationships and perform well as leaders and also make us really glitchy. Today I'll be on, as always, with my producer, James Lipshaw, and you may hear his voice from time to time as we go through the episode. So, my goal this week was to talk about how do we make requests and how do we set boundaries in duets or dyads or when we're working with another single person at work. And as I started to work on the episode, I just kept getting stuck because I wanted to create a workout of the week that I either do or could do. And I realized there are certain requests and boundaries that I am so uncomfortable making. And there are certain requests and boundaries I'm perfectly comfortable making. And I didn't know what the difference between them was. And I know there are certain requests and boundaries that when I even think about setting them, I feel so squirmy and uncomfortable and awful. And as a recovering people pleaser, I am very aware that there are probably a lot of places where I could be better at setting boundaries and making requests, but I'm not. So then I thought, okay, well, what do I need to be able to do to know what are those boundaries that I'm perfectly comfortable and feel entitled to set and ones that I don't? And I realized I needed to be a lot clearer about what are the trade-offs involved. And so today's episode is going to be about how do we recognize the trade-offs that we are called to make when we want someone else to do something and or when we are considering setting a boundary about what we will or won't do. You might be thinking to yourself, okay, what does this have to do with psychological safety? And the reason that we're thinking about requests and boundaries and what are the trade-offs that I make in my interpersonal relationships is because if we don't know what those trade-offs are, if we don't request what we need or we don't set a boundary when we should, we can become kind of emotionally volatile. And I'll start with a story in a minute about that. But I think we've all had the experience where we go along to get along up till a point and then we lose it. And so going along to get along, where you don't request what you want, you don't set a boundary, undermines psychological safety in our duo or duet or partnership or colleagueship, because the other person can't depend on me to know, can't depend on me to share what do I need and what will I do and what won't I do, and can depend on me to lose my cool when those get violated somehow. And so I put them in this awkward or untenable situation where they have to somehow guess what's going to piss me off. And that just, I don't think is going to work for psychological safety. So that's why we're exploring. A number of years ago, I read a book called The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge, and then I read The Fifth Discipline Field Book, also by Peter Senge and colleagues. And these books were all about how do we apply what he called personal mastery in everyday life, which is how do we be aware of our cognitive routines and emotional reactions and bring our best self to our leadership interactions. It also covered a bunch of other things, including the fifth discipline, which is systems thinking, which we'll probably get to at another time in this podcast. But in the section on personal mastery, he had a wonderful story about something he called gray stamps. And gray stamps, the idea behind it is simple. Imagine that every time you feel something uncomfortable, like you're annoyed or you resent what someone's asking you to do, or you feel really disappointed that they didn't do something for you, you don't express it. And instead, you kind of save it up. The other thing that they noted is not only do you not express it, you might not even admit to yourself that you're kind of not expressing it. And the analogy with stamps is you collect them. So gray stamps are like a little emotional postage stamp. Someone interrupts you in a meeting and you say nothing. Postage stamp. Your partner shows up late again and you say, no problem. Stamp. Your colleague takes credit for something you do and you don't speak up. Stamp. What Sengi noted in this story is you can actually do this for quite a long time. And you can end up feeling like this very reasonable, accommodating, generous person who gives people all this slack. Until one day you run out of room and something small happens and it triggers you. And you don't respond with collecting another gray stamp. You respond with kind of a full-scale little tantrum. You're triggered and your colleagues know it. And they're left with this feeling like, huh, what? That was so small. So that moment where we overreact, it isn't often about the present offense. It's the accumulated trade-off. It's the accumulated cost of all those trade-offs we never noted. It's the cost of all those things we accommodated, but we didn't really note. So the readiness goal this week is to work with these things that you usually don't note or you let slide by. And so what we'd like you to be able to do at the end of this episode is notice when you're giving something up. Your preference, your standard, what you consider right or fair or just, or maybe your voice, something that costs you internally when you give it up. So I want to talk a little bit about my struggle in this area. So I jokingly said I'm a recovering people pleaser, but it's actually really true. And I'm using the word recovering because I think I am so much better at not doing this than I used to be. But as someone who really cares about relating to people, feeling connected, them feeling connected to me, it's very difficult, verging on painful, for me to sometimes say no or set a boundary like I'm not going to do that, especially if I think it's going to disappoint somebody or think it might make them angry. And so when I read Oliver Burkeman's book last year called Meditation for Mortals, in which he talks about how we each are basically finite humans, and Oliver Burkeman's wonderful message, evangelical message, is you cannot do everything. He focuses primarily on productivity. But I took this into the interpersonal realm of I cannot agree to everything. And in the morning meditation for this particular mortal that really stuck with me, Oliver Burkeman quotes the work of economist Thomas Sowell, who says, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. I found this electrifying because I love to have the fantasy that I can do X that I know the other person doesn't want, and they're still going to like me, or there's going to be no downstream bad consequences. So the idea that in all our interpersonal interactions, there are almost always trade-offs. I'm going to get X, but I'm going to lose Y, was shocking, but also in a weird way, a relief. The reason is it pierced my fantasy that I could always find a way to be kind, be clear, be clever, never disappoint anyone, and always feel good about it, and them always feel good about it. And I think the comment, no solutions, only trade offs, made me realize that, like, my being happy all the time and the other person being happy all the time is not actually a thing. So, another lens on this, kind of some of the way that I cope with dilemmas that I face that I find really, really sticky and I can't find a way to unravel, not to mix my metaphors, let's just say they're very tangled and I can't unravel them, is I try to get different analytic frameworks to help me see it. And so the thing I couldn't untangle was what are the things that I don't feel comfortable making requests about and I don't feel comfortable setting boundaries on, and what are the things I do. And so I realized, like, if I could understand a little bit about what was going on with me underneath that, what were the trade-offs, I might be able to help myself and possibly help some of you. So the second thing I looked at regarding trade-offs is another economic theory, which is called the Pareto frontier. And when James and I were talking about this at the beginning of the podcast, he was remarking, and I certainly thought this. I thought, like, Pareto was like some mathematical principle because it always sounds so mathematical. But actually, the Pareto frontier idea came from a person named Vilfredo Pareto. What an awesome name, by the way, in 1906. And what he posited is the Pareto frontier is the place where trade-offs become unavoidable. So additional economic theory around this and additional mathematical computations around this basically show that there are areas where you can get exactly what you want and I can get exactly what I want, but there's a place at which the world gets arranged such that any gain for you is going to be a loss for me, and that is the Pareto frontier. So what I realized is when I have to set a boundary, and by the way, I think you can make a request first because sometimes people will do what you want. But after a certain point, if they don't do what you want, then you have to set a boundary, and that's so painful. And by the way, one of the things I love about this is, I used to go around saying, XYZ doesn't respect my boundaries, by which I mean they transgressed the boundary that I set. And later I learned it's not that X doesn't respect my boundaries, it's that I don't respect my boundaries because I'm the only one who can hold the boundary and have a consequence that follows when somebody crosses the boundary. It's not up to them to respect my boundaries, though it would be nice if they did. So one thing I figured out is my boundary edge is my personal Pareto frontier. That's just one thing, by which I mean before that edge, I can accommodate the other person and feel good. It's not too much to ask. I don't feel like I'm giving away my power. I don't feel like I'm compromising myself. Yay. I can also stay connected and stay centered while also accommodating. I feel good. But beyond that edge, at the Pareto frontier of my boundary, every move costs me something. So if I speak up and say, hey, it's not okay that you've come late to our last 3 get-togethers, I'm going to risk disconnection with the person who's pissed off at me for speaking up that way. Or, example, if I stay silent and don't say anything about their coming late all the time, I'm giving something of myself away. I'm going to feel like a chump. I'm going to feel like I'm a doormat. So one of the things that I think can help us is if you're going to know you're at a boundary when you fear loss of something external or loss of something internal. So we've talked a little bit about no solutions, only trade-offs from Thomas Sowell. We've talked about the Pareto boundary where there's automatically a trade-off. When you put those together in relationships in a duo, I often think of the work of David Schnark, who was a family and sex therapist, actually, who wrote an amazing book called Passionate Marriage. And in that book, he talks about a concept that he calls the two-choice dilemma. And he himself notes that there's a lot of redundancy in that phrase, two choices, dilemma, two-choice dilemma. And the reason is he wants to highlight that basically where there are trade-offs, neither solution is going to come without a loss. And again, I found this both electrifying and very discouraging because it pierced my fantasy once again that I could set a boundary and not have anybody ever be pissed off at me or not like me. Or I could stay silent about something and still feel good about myself. So a way to characterize the two-choice dilemma is I can stay true to myself and risk disapproval or conflict or disconnection, or I can adapt, stay silent, go along to get along, and basically lose a piece of myself. So again, as you try to figure out, and I try to figure out what are the boundaries that I'm going to set and how, knowing what those trade-offs are, I'm going to lose a piece of myself, I'm going to risk losing a part of the relationship, might be the case. I'm going to give a large-scale example of this in my life, and then I want to talk about applying it in micro settings of leadership, personal leadership for us. So in 1981, I was a sophomore in college and had a girlfriend in high school, but told myself, oh, I just liked her. I'm not gay, I'm not a lesbian, just happened to like her. But as I got into college and I saw all these other kids who were not so many, but some who were out and gay, and I happened to go to this panel that, to their credit, the Harvard Athletic Association had, or some part of the Harvard athletic complex, of gay students on campus. I was like, what? Gay athletes on campus. And I went to this, and there was a panel of actually only women talking about, being gay and being an athlete. And being that myself, I was just so thrilled. I was like, wow, that's me. I'm good. I can come out. But still, I had a lot of trepidation and worry about coming out as gay and coming out as a lesbian because of these exact trade-offs. So I felt really strongly that if I was going to be true to myself, I really had to come out and be open about my sexuality. And I was afraid I might lose friends, potentially forever. I wasn't exactly sure how my family would respond. My parents, my sister, my brother, other friends that I had on campus. And ultimately, I realized that that was a trade-off I had to accept because I just couldn't go around basically hiding who I was. So I ended up coming out. And luckily for me, I lived in Massachusetts and I was in a context where I really bore almost no negative consequences for it. So as you think about these trade-offs to set boundaries, even if it's not as big a leap as coming out as gay, it still requires a leap of faith. You do not know what is going to happen in terms of the relationship with the other person when you set that boundary, and we fear lots of things. But paradoxically, often when we are more consistent and we set boundaries, I have certainly found that it also can strengthen relationships because people know where you stand. So I'd like to end with kind of talking about why understanding these trade-offs for yourself is an important part of psychological safety. As I thought about this and why do I even care about this, I realized that when I'm unclear, when I don't feel comfortable setting a boundary or don't feel comfortable making a request, but I'm still not okay with the trade-off, I haven't accepted the trade-off, I create a context inside myself that I feel is kind of like an unstable emotional equilibrium. That is, when I avoid naming the trade-offs, I um, am still likely to make one, but I'm not going to name it. Or I'm so wobbly and resentful that I didn't set the boundary, or I'm so fearful and worried that what's going to happen if I do set the boundary, that both of those things can lead to kind of emotional overreactions. So if I don't feel safe within myself, and I certainly don't feel safe within myself when I'm unclear about what I want and I'm doing something that doesn't feel quite right, I can't interact with you, my duet partner, my partner, my colleague, because I'm either going to disappear unexpectedly or I'm going to explode unexpectedly. And so for me, what that tends to look like is pattern one, I call myself like a nice chump, basically. I give in, I suppress my preferences, and I avoid tension. Yay, no tension. But the internal cost for me is resentment builds. I lose self-respect, and I can also get angry. The other pattern I notice is like the overreactor or the overcorrector or the, snarl person. And I don't know, James, I don't think I've done that to you, but I can assure you that some colleagues who have patiently worked with me for many years have experienced that. And the overcorrector is the person I am. I suddenly set a hard boundary, like I dig in my heels. I can be kind of haughty. I use a sort of sharp tone of voice. I'm very reactive. And that comes up when there's like accumulated resentment or it's an identity issue. I'm not going to be a chump. So both of these make it difficult for my colleagues or my friends or a partner to know what to expect of me. And that lack of predictability is a huge underminer of psychological safety in our duo. What's interesting about the chump and the overreactor is that they're both kind of reactive positions. They're not chosen ones. And I think when we understand intellectually, at least, the trade-offs a little bit, we make an emotional choice, we come from a much more grounded, easy to deal with, not as in nicey nice, but grounded, centered place as we interact with other people. So I'd like to end with our workout of the week. Our workout of the week this week is for you to notice, if you can, and name trade-offs that come up for you as you are considering, should I make a request? Should I set a boundary? Or forget the word should. Notice and name the trade-offs when you feel really uncomfortable about something that somebody's doing or asking you to do, or something you haven't done or haven't said or have withheld your point of view. So for example, if you find yourself saying, sure, no problem, whatever works, it's fine, when you don't actually feel that way, that would be an example of noticing it. And then you would say, okay, I said no problem because the trade-off is I want this person to like me and I don't want to get in a fight with them right now, but I'm giving away the fact that I'm not okay with what they're doing. So you can ask yourself, what am I giving up right now? Or what is the cost of that for me? Don't need to change it, don't need to make the request, don't need to set the boundary, just notice the trade-off. So the workout of the week is notice and name the trade-offs when you're uncomfortable. Thank you for spending time with Curious Now. Curious Now is produced at the Center for Medical Simulation by James Lipshaw. And if you've enjoyed this conversation today, you might also be interested in our personal leadership coaching service, where we deepen this practice into long-term challenges or goals that you have. Or you might be interested in other training that we're offering, such as our new simulation leadership course starting this August 2026.